I feel rather like the Colin Furs of kilt makers because I've rather put my foot in it. The customer just came in from out of town for a forward fitting. You know, that spot I have where I've gone as far as I can, and if I was to take it any further and then measure them and they changed or something was wrong, I'd have to back up and undo work. So the forward fitting, the canvas is in, the strap was there to be placed against the inner apron. Well, first off, I discovered he's put on 2 inches since then, but that's okay. Alter the aprons a little bit. But then he says words that absolutely froze my blood. He said, "That's not a box pleat." And I stared at him with wild surmise. What's that quote? "Silent upon a peak in Darien." Because I suddenly remembered he'd mentioned it at some point, but nowhere in my notes did I write down that he wanted a box pleat. But I remember the conversation now, so let's see what I can do. Can I take this knife-pleated kilt and turn it into a box-pleated kilt in time for the 14th when he's back here to pick it up? Stay tuned. So here we are, part 2 of can we turn a knife-pleated kilt into a box-pleated kilt? It's like an episode of Time Team. We only have 3 days. Actually, no, I have 13 days to do this. So since we last spoke, I've done the teardown, or started the teardown. The canvas is out. The bastings are out, and I'm just about to start unpicking the seams. Now, as I think I should have probably mentioned elsewhere, the first and the last pleats, that one there, on a box pleat are knife pleats pointing towards the center. So I don't have to do anything to this one. And this one I'm going to resew so that it's a knife pleat, but pointing the other way. So my next stage from here is I'm going to start unpicking these seams. And I'm going to do it one by one and then baste them up. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Here we are again with, can we turn a knife pleat kilt into a box pleat kilt? Yes, we can. So what I've done is I've completely ripped it down. The lining and canvas is over there. Now, fortunately, we're pleating to the center blue line right there, and I already know the pleat widths, and because of it's been sewn up, we have sort of the shadow of the crease right there. So what I do, the pleat is centered on that. It's going to be 7/8 of an inch wide. You can see that trace of a chalk line. That's this edge of the pleat. I pinch and I fold over. So this is now kind of an S shape, and I can feel inside. I can feel the crease there, right there. I'm holding it down with my fingers, and I can feel it. It's at about the center of the pleat. We really want to stay to the center of the pleat. I mean, sure, you could go all the way to the end of the pleat, but there's a chance you're going to go past it, and then the kilt's going to get impossibly bulky and difficult to thin out the back. The other thing that's really made this possible is that you can see the very generous seam allowance that I've left. That's what, 1.5 inch seam allowance on either side. So I have my cotton basting thread. I fold to the center. I can feel it with my finger to the center. I stitch a back stitch, and this is a recycled basting thread. I've already used it to pleat a kilt, and I save it and use it again. And it's often that first one's a little bit wonky, but it's going to be covered by the top band. So, and I just keep doing this all the way to the end. And they're, what, about 1/2 inch apart. So, you know, like pinky finger, slightly narrower than a pinky finger width apart. Okay. And this is somewhat laborious, but it works. You know, if you're doing it for yourself, you know, paying yourself a wage, so who cares how much time it takes? And you get the satisfaction of having done it yourself. I guess what I'm hoping is that people will go, I'll do that myself instead of bringing work to McDonald's. Because box pleats are almost there. So if you're right-handed, I guess you can do this working from the other side and probably working, no, you'd be working from the top down. Yeah, that's right. I'm not deliberately dismissive of right-handed people. I'm just giving you an introduction into the world of left-handed people, where we're in your world and we have to go, let's see how this works for us. So I did a couple of back stitches. I snip it off. And I'm going to do that 34 more times to the end. And then I'm going to press it like this, let it dry, and then sew it up again and carry on as we normally do. Thank you. So here we are, showing it from a slightly better angle. I fold, I hold with the fingers, I do a back stitch, I fold and I hold with the fingers. Oops. Do some back stitches. The other thing I'm watching for, remember, because the tartan is essentially a grid pattern, I can keep an eye here to make sure that these pleats are uniform depth, right? I can eyeball it like so, and I'm just going to keep on going to the bottom and doing a back stitch. So there you go. There was a better view of it. Thanks. So here we are continuing with turning a knife pleat kilt into a box pleat kilt. As you can see, previously I'd torn it down, folded over to create the box pleat, basted in place, pressed it, let it dry. Now I'm sewing it up again. And this illustrates why it's absolutely critical to have a good seam allowance. Now we're starting at the left hip, and of course the buttonhole is here, so the subsequent pleats have been cut back on the inside sufficient so they don't block the buttonhole. So as you can see, this one's a, what, 3/8 of a seam allowance. I can't pin it down, so I've just pinned the cloth to each other. And I have to do the same there. But fortunately from here and then onwards, we have about a 1/2 inch to 5/8 seam allowance, so we can pin it down and carry on. So yeah, it's not difficult, it's just a lot of work. Now, of course, the cloth has been pressed a couple of times, so the feel of the cloth is a bit different because the nap is raised a little bit. So it handles a bit differently. And of course, we don't have the inertia as we're pleating. We don't have the inertia of an uncut piece of cloth. So there's a little more care required in arranging our pleats. But yeah, so there's 4 pleats done. I think I have 24 more to do. I'll check in when it's done. Here we are again, I guess, with the next logical place to film the conversion of a knife pleated kilt to a box pleated kilt. As you can see, I pulled out originally the pleats were basted their entire length, but you'll notice that I've pulled them out to the bottom of the fell, and the reason for that is once I leave it in while I sew the seam, and then I unpick it back to the fell, because if I leave it in place and then line up the next seam, this can throw my eye off. But I get that out of the way, and my eye can judge a symmetric pleat. So I just left that last one in to show you. And once again, as I've said elsewhere, the first and the last pleat are knife pleats, and they're facing in. Can't see how I've signed it, but I've signed it. So the next stage, I mean, you'll look at the pleats and it looks like a bit of a stramash, an unholy mess. But my next stage is I'm going to baste these from left to right in at least 2 spots, perhaps 3, to hold it exactly in position and then press it. Then after that, once it dries, lining goes in and I call the customer. Here we are again. You can tell that, or you can see that I've basted it. I'm just about halfway through the pressing. And remember what a godless mess it was beforehand. But see how nicely it's turning out. So it's taking a bit of time because my 100-year-old iron holds heat wonderfully, but the heat does, the wet kilt does literally act as a heat sink. So I've just paused for it to heat up again. So I'll press this, and then after that I'll show you the other side, just to show you why basting is necessary, because you're going to see, although this side's going to look very, very good, the other side's not, is going to look like it hasn't been touched. So I'll show you that in a sec. And that click tells me that the iron is hot again. So here we are. I've pressed the outside of the kilt, flipped it over, and you can see that the inside of the kilt doesn't look like it's been ironed at all, right? So this is why we press both sides. And that's why I baste it to death before I press it. I did notice, this feature of the, and if you remember my series of videos on the 3rd generation Seaforth kilt, and I'd remarked on this feature in the cutout. Well, again, I've taken this kilt pleated to the, well, it's knife pleated, converted it to box pleat, and I see this feature where it wasn't there before. So that leads me to believe that the kilt maker of 81 years ago, who made that Seaforth kilt in 1942, sewed the kilt as for a knife pleat and then boxed the pleats. And I'm yet unsure how they did that, but there we go. I've learned a tiny little bit. Okay, so the iron's hot again. I'm going to press this, and then I'm going to leave it to dry overnight, because in other tailoring, people use a clapper, a piece of clean softwood, and press it on it, and it draws the heat and it draws the water out. Now that works on a single layer of cloth, but you got something like 6 layers here through the box pleats, and the clapper would have no effect at all. I think I'm a little bit farther ahead in that I'm pressing on a bare yellow cedar table. I used to have a blanket underneath, but I think perhaps the table's acting a little bit like a clapper. Perhaps it moves the process along. Okay, I'll press this and check in again when I got something to say. Here we are again with the closing episode of Can We Turn a Knife Pleat into a Box Pleat Kilt? And of course the executive summary, yes, if we have sufficient seam allowances in the pleats. So here we are, it's good to go. And again, my own take on things, in that the first and the last pleats are knife pleat pointed inwards. I've left the basting in until the customer comes tomorrow. So it's good to go. I've left, as is usually my case these days, I've left the apron, I've left the lining open at that spot, because when he comes tomorrow, we're going to precisely fit him. There's the left-hand hip strap through the buttonhole, so that I can fit it to him, chalk it, mark it, sew it up again so that it fits precisely right from the get-go. So that was a bit of relief, lessons learned. I've learned that A, we can turn a knife into a box, and B, I've learned that I have to have all of the information on all of my documents, because again, we'd agreed on this. I have the order book in which we have the measurements. It was written down there. We had the customer's account statement. It was written down there. But it wasn't written down on the worksheet. So there's going to be a lot of copy paste, I think, in my future, plus attention to detail. So thank you, and carry on.